It's Channel Grim and Grin's Monster Bites, the Silent Screams. This episode, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from 1920 is a silent horror film that has definitely suffered from the movies that followed it. If this was the only Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde film ever made, I wouldn't be able to recommend it highly enough. However, unfortunately, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde seems to be one of the more popular stories to adapt, and unfortunately, almost every version seems to adapt it in the same way. Despite all of these versions being pretty dramatically different from the actual book it spawns from, they all seem to hit the exact same beats in the exact same order. This is not to say that this method of adaptation is badly done, it's just overdone, and so the original suffers. However, despite this, I'm definitely not knocking the 1920 version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, just saying that if you're overly familiar with film adaptations of the movie, you might not find much new in this one. That said, it's absolutely not without its highlights, or highlight, namely being John Barrymore. John Barrymore plays both a very good Jekyll and an excellent Hyde. It's just so fun watching him be a cad. Some notable highlights are when he stomps a child to death, pretty much going out of his way to do so, and when he beats a man to death with his cane. It's also very impressive that his early transformation is done just entirely with him distorting his own face and apparently no makeup whatsoever, so that's a fair effort. However, while that's impressive, my favorite transformation scene is when he's sleeping. The creeping infection of his mind that is Hyde is represented in the form of a giant phantom spider that crawls around his room, climbs up on his bed, and then goes into him. It's a definitely bizarre choice of visualization, but by far also the most interesting thing in this film. I kind of wish that if they had the technology to do this weird and unsettling giant spider, they had just made a original story with giant spiders, because that scene is just creepy, especially for a 1920s movie. And so Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from 1920, if you're a huge fan of this story, or if you're not too overly familiar with it and it hasn't become stale, then I definitely suggest you check this version out. And if you have found the standard telling of the story too done to death, then maybe check out Hammer's Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde instead. It's a fun and silly twist.
This is the story of Dr. Jekyll